Is on the adoption of the resolution as amended. Those in favor shall say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, on that I request the yeas and the nays.
The gentleman from Colorado is recognized. The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. It will be a 5-minute vote.
The House is voting now on the rule that will set the guidelines for debate on two bills. A bill preventing student loan interest rates from increasing. That bill is coming up in the House tomorrow. Another bill is about cybersecurity legislation that's going to be debated later today in the House. We talked with a reporter about the level of the cybersecurity threat in the U.S.
Tim Starks is with us. He writes for Congressional Quarterly, and we're talking about the cybersecurity legislation in the House today. Tim, there are 3 more cybersecurity bills that we could see by week's end. Why is this legislation on the front burner for House Republicans this week?
There are a couple reasons for that. One is that all of the security experts in the United States, a lot of the intelligence agencies, on the list of gravest security threats that we face, they list cybersecurity, cyber threats as one of the major ones because of the potential for doing things like actually collapsing the electricity grid in the worst case scenario. So there is a broad consensus that this is a legitimate threat that needs to be addressed. The other issue is that this is increasingly an economic issue as well, and with this being an election year and with everyone concerned on both sides of the aisle about trying to do something to help the economy, this is one way to address that. The economic issues are pertaining to the grand theft of data that's happening on a major level of intellectual property and other things that are potentially hurting these companies and costing them millions of dollars. The second part of that is related to wanting to pressure the Senate to do something. The Senate hasn't acted yet, and the hope from the people who are pushing this in the House is that if the House acts, that will be a little bit of an impetus for the Senate to do something.
You touched on this briefly. How serious is the threat to the nation's computer infrastructure networks?
You know, there are some differences of opinion about how grave that threat is. There's a view amongst a fair number of security experts that the deepest threats are not so much the nightmare scenarios of someone destabilizing the entire banking system, for instance. That is a fairly far-fetched scenario because the people who have the capabilities to do that are nation states who, if they did that to us, it could launch a war, and that would be something they wouldn't want to do in most cases. The actual thing that seems to be happening the most, though, is related to that theft. There's estimates that there are trillions of dollars worth of intellectual property being lost as a result of the stealing that's happening. There are also there's also nation states that are a little bit more comfortable, said to be a little bit more comfortable to break into, say, our Department of Defense networks, for instance, and try to steal our defense secrets. That's something that has a little bit of a national security threat because of the capabilities they might receive from it. But a lot of it is very much economic related, is what everyone kind of agrees on.
Tim Starks, staff writer for Congressional Quarterly. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Mr. Courtney. Mr. Courtney votes no.
On this vote, the yeas are 236, the nays are 185. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The unfinished business is the question on suspending the rules and passing H.R. 2240 as amended, which the clerk will report by title.
Union Calendar number 314, H.R. 2240, a bill to authorize the exchange of land or interest in land between Lowell National Historical Park and the City of Lowell and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The House will be in order. Now what?
The House will be in order. The House will come to order. All members will please take their conversations from the aisles. Appreciate it. The House will come to order. The chair would ask all members to please take their conversations from the aisles. The chair would ask members to take their seats. The chair would ask that the House come to order. concerned about. Does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include the extraneous material on H.R. 3523.
Without objection, so ordered. Pursuant to House Resolution 631 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House of the State of the Union for consideration of H.R. 3523. The Chair appoints the gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Biggert, to preside over the Committee of the Whole.
Members will take their conversations off the floor. Members will clear the aisles. The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of H.R. 3523, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to provide for the sharing of certain cyber threat intelligence and cyber threat information between the intelligence community and cybersecurity entities and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the bill is considered read the first time. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Rogers, and the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Ruppersberger, each will control 30 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would yield myself 4 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized for 4 minutes.
Never a problem I have seen when it comes to our national security, Madam Chair, that we are just not prepared to handle. In just the last few years, nation-states like China have stolen enough intellectual property from just defense contractors that would be equivalent to 50 times the print collection of the Library of Congress. We have nation-states who are literally stealing jobs and our future. We also have countries that are engaged in activities and have capabilities that have the ability to break networks, computer networks, which means you can't just reboot. It means your system is literally broken. Those kinds of disruptions can be catastrophic when you think about the financial sector or the energy sector or our command and control elements for all our national security apparatus. This is as serious a problem as I have seen. So last year, my partner, the Dutch Ruppersberger, the Vice Chairman and Ranking Member of the Intelligence Committee, we agreed that this was a significant enough problem to the future prosperity of America that we better do something about it. We needed to stop the Chinese government from stealing our stuff. We needed to stop the Russians from what they're doing to our networks and people's personal information, data, and resources. We needed to prepare for countries like Iran and North Korea so that they don't do something catastrophic to our networks here in America and cause us real harm to real people. So in a bipartisan way, we set out to do something very, very, very narrow. When the government spies overseas, it collects malware, viruses, software that is dangerous to our computers. It means they can either steal our stuff, the personal information off of your computer, or they can steal the secrets that make your business viable, the kinds of secrets that give people jobs. So wouldn't it be great if we could take that source code, that software, and share it with the private sector so that they could put it on their private systems like they do every single day to try to protect networks and have that added advantage of that extra coverage from that malicious source code. The good news is this happens every day. If you have Norton or McAfee or Symantec or any other antivirus protection on your computer, it has patches of information that they know is really bad stuff. And every time you turn your computer on, it updates and tries to protect your computer, your personal information. That's all this is adding to that patchwork some zeros and some ones that we know is malicious code that is either going to steal your information or break your computer or something worse. That's all this bill is. It draws a very fine line between the government and the private sector. It is all voluntary. There's no new mandates. There is no government surveillance, none, not any, in this bill. It just says if we know we have this source code, shouldn't we be obligated to give it so it doesn't do something bad to the companies and individuals in America? That's all this bill does. We have worked collaboratively with hundreds of companies, privacy groups, civil libertarians. We have worked with government folks. We have had hundreds and hundreds of meetings for over a year. We have kept this bill open in an unprecedented, transparent way to try to meet the needs of privacy concerns, civil libertarian concerns, civil liberties concerns. We wanted to make sure that this was a bill that people understood exactly what we are trying to do, how simple it is, and how crucial it is to the future defense of this great nation. You know, without our ideas, without our innovation that countries like China are stealing every single day, we will cease to be a great nation. They are slowly and silently and quickly stealing the value and prosperity of America. I'd yield myself one more additional minute.
It's recognized for one more minute.
One credit card company said that they get attacked for your personal information 300,000 times a day. One company. We have companies that can directly show you that stolen intellectual property, one particular company estimated 20,000 manufacturing jobs that they lost for Americans that were good-paying jobs because countries like China stole their intellectual property and illegally competed against them in the marketplace. This is as bad a problem, Madam Speaker, as I have seen, and I think you'll hear throughout the debate this has been a responsible debate. It has been a responsible negotiation to get to privacy concerns and our ability to protect your information on your computer through these series of zeros and ones, the binary code on our computers. Again, I want to thank my ranking member for his partnership and his work. He has been exceptional to work with on something that we both agree, and we agreed in a bipartisan fashion was a danger to the future prosperity of America. And with that, I would reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized for such time as he may consume.
I do want to thank the chairman for working with us in a bipartisan way to protect our country from this very serious threat of cyber attacks. As ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, people often ask me, what keeps me up at night? I tell them weapons of mass destruction entering the country undetected, and also a catastrophic cyber attack shutting down our water supply, power grid, or banking systems. And that's just one of many areas that could be attacked and shut down. Every day, U.S. websites and our nation's networks are threatened by foreign governments like China, Iran, Russia, and other groups trying to steal our money and valuable trade secrets. According to the National Counterterrorism Executive, the #1 thing cyber thieves are trying to steal is information and communication technology, which forms the backbone of nearly every other technology. In fact, $300 billion of trade secrets are stolen every year, according to the United States Cyber Command. This proves we need to make real changes to how we protect our cyber systems. The Cyber Intelligence Sharing and Protection Act helps the private sector protect itself and its clients from these attackers and data thieves. The intelligence community has the ability to detect these cyber threats, these malicious codes and viruses, before they are able to attack our networks. But right now, federal law prohibits the intelligence community from sharing the classified cyber threat with the companies that will protect us, that control the network, the AT&Ts, the Verizons, the Comcast, those groups. We have the ability to give them the information to protect us, but yet we have to pass a law to do that, and that's why we're here today. The Cyber Intelligence Sharing and Protection Act clearly will do that if we pass this bill. It allows the intelligence community to share the codes and signatures associated with malware and viruses and the means to counter the bad stuff with the companies. These companies keep a lookout for these viruses and work to stop them before it is able to attack their system. Companies that voluntarily give information about the cyber attack back to the government, machine code consisting of strings of zeros and ones, uniquely identifies the malware. Cyber analysts will use this information to better understand the attack and try to figure out who launched it and where it came from. This information will be used to protect against similar attacks in the future. Now, the Democrats worked hard to protect privacy and civil liberties in this bill throughout the entire process. We fought for additional privacy protections in the original bill that was marked up in committee. In the version we will vote on tomorrow morning, additional changes are also included in the amendments. The privacy and civil liberty groups and the White House all agree we made important positive changes that went a long way to improve the initial bill that came out of committee. We severely limit what information can be shared with the government and how it can be used. It is also important to note the entire process is completely voluntary and provides industry the flexibility they need to deal with the business realities. The bill also requires an annual report from the Inspector General of the intelligence community to ensure none of the information provided to the government is mishandled or misused. This is a very important privacy issue. The review will include recommendations, annual recommendations to improve the protection of privacy and civil liberties. That review will be done again by the Inspector General. We also made it clear this legislation grants no new authority to the Department of Defense, the National Security Agency, or the intelligence community. At the urging of the White House and others, we included the Department of Homeland Security in the process, so that there's not even a perception that our intelligence agencies or military will be in control of this. The Homeland Security Department will be coordinating as a civil body. In addition, companies that act in good faith to protect systems and networks can receive liability protection. This is what our bill does. Now, what does it not do? The bill does not allow the government to order companies to turn over private email or other personal information. This is not surveillance. The bill does not allow the government to monitor private networks, read private email, censor or shut down any website. We have a broad coalition of support, more than 100 co-sponsors, close to 30 companies and industry groups and dozens of trade organizations like Facebook, Microsoft, IBM, a lot of different groups that are supporting this bill. This is not a perfect bill, but the threat is great. I believe this legislation is critical for our national security and yet deals with the issue of privacy. We can do better in privacy, and we hope to get the bill to the Senate where there will be a lot more negotiation. Congress must act now, and I encourage my colleagues to vote for this bill. I reserve my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady, Ms. Myrick, who is on the Intelligence Committee and a tremendous expertise on counterterrorism issues.
The gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized for 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to say a big thanks to the Chair and Ranking Member for all of their months of hard work on putting this cybersecurity bill together, and it is a bipartisan Intelligence Committee bill. You know, we all know the private sector is a very diverse world that includes reputable companies, but also gray market suppliers and counterfeiters and state-owned enterprises and other entities that often act against the national security interests of the United States as well as other private companies. The information technology sector in particular includes companies that are associated with some foreign governments and militaries and intelligence services of nations that attack the United States in cyberspace daily. State and local entities, along with the private sector, don't have the resources or the capabilities or the information necessary to address these cybersecurity threats. This bill creates a necessary mechanism for the federal government to share its informational resources in cybersecurity threat analysis with the private sector and with state and local entities. The purpose of the bill is to transmit important cybersecurity information from the federal government to the private sector, not vice versa. The bill would empower the private sector to begin taking necessary steps to protect itself from cyber attacks, some they don't have any clue are happening. Ultimately, though, it's going to be important for Congress and the federal government to continue the debate on cybersecurity to determine how to best confront the changing threats, because this world is changing daily. And the federal government can't leave those responsibilities solely to the private sector, especially, like the chairman already mentioned, countries like China are developing continuously cyber warfare capabilities, and the cyber attacks that they commit against the Western companies and infrastructures and government entities we all know about. So I urge my colleagues to vote yes on this important piece of legislation, an important step in trying to protect the private sector in this country. And I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Maryland. Who seeks time? The gentleman from Maryland.
Yes. Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to my distinguished colleague from the state of Utah, Mr. Boswell, who formerly served on the Intelligence Committee.
The gentleman from Iowa is recognized
Iowa. I'm sorry,
for 2 minutes.
Iowa. Say Utah, Iowa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the correction. We grow corn in Iowa, and we grow potatoes in Idaho. A little bit of fun. I rise to speak in support of this bill today. I look across at Chairman Rogers and here at Ranking Member Ruppersberger, and I have great confidence. I know these men. I know their staff. And they have come to this very serious matter that lays before our country that we need to understand. We must take action. I'm encouraged by the process to involve key stakeholders from private industry and privacy groups during this drafting. This transparent engagement shaped many of the bipartisan constructive amendments being considered today that will improve the bill, and it's a good thing. The threat from malicious actors in cyberspace is real. You've heard it said over and over this already by those that have spoken ahead of me, and I concur with what they say. It's an absolutely real thing. You only need to pick up the newspaper or turn on the TV to see the threats facing our networks. These networks include those that power our homes and our factories, our small businesses, allow our banking system to function, and provide the very backbone to our current American way of life. We rely on these networks every day. The bill under consideration today is a very narrow piece, but while we can agree, it's a critical one to helping secure our networks and therefore the way of life as we know it today. There are continuing debates on how to implement the bill, but the debate isn't over whether it needs to be done. It must be done. Information we ask our intelligence community to use in the protection of our government networks should, in a secure way, be shared to protect the many other critical networks we rely on. I believe companies are doing what they can. They're doing what they can to protect their networks to the extent they can today, but there is more that must be done. We cannot be in a situation where the government had information to prevent or mitigate a catastrophic cyber attack, and yet we did not have the procedure in place to share this information. Our American way of life includes a great respect for privacy and our civil liberties. We make no mistake about that. This bill, with the addition of many of the amendments which were drafted in concert with privacy groups, addresses many of those concerns. In addition, the annual unclassified report required by the Statutory Intelligence Community Inspector General will inform whether there are additional adjustments need to be made. 10 seconds.
I yield another 10 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized for 10 seconds.
Forgive it.
So in closing, I want to say this. Congress cannot wait to act. Network security hasn't kept up with network speed. This is the fundamental purpose of this bill. I encourage members to begin to secure our networks through sharing information about the threats. Please vote yes.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Illinois.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the ranking member and the chairman for your hard work on this issue and the members of the committee. This is very important. It goes beyond partisanship. This is about national security. You know, the idea of cyber attacks, it's not something that is just out there in space that we really don't need to worry about. This is an issue that's here today. and it's here right now. In fact, just today, the New York Stock Exchange was a target of a DDoS attack on some of its external computer systems. And that's not something that we just magically happen to have today. This is happening every day, thousands and thousands of times a day. I'm a military guy. I'm a military pilot. And, you know, I think a lot about the threats from outside. You think a lot about threats of terrorism and threats of invasion or anything along that line. But I'll tell you, one of the biggest threats that really keep us up at night is this idea of a cyber attack. And I think it's something that we have to take head on. And this voluntary information sharing between classified portions of our government and certified private actors will serve to enhance our defenses greatly. It's important to note the amount of classified information currently shared between our government and private industry is muddled at best. The few private companies who are lucky enough to receive an invitation into the current classified annex of cybersecurity sharing face significant challenges when it comes to even understanding what that information is. Many times they simply get a badly scanned printout of current threat situation from which they try to prevent a future attack, and it's woefully inadequate. We talk a lot about the Russians and about the Chinese and their use of cyber warfare against us, and that's a significant threat. That's something very serious. But I want to speak just momentarily about the threat from Iran. We all know that Iran is a very serious country that's very seriously focused on bringing down, in many cases, the West. They've said it themselves. The Iranian regime from the highest level down has publicly stated their plans to fight enemies with abundant power in cyberspace and internet warfare. It's also publicly stated that Iran blames the West for the Stuxnet virus, which disrupted their nuclear program, and have vowed retaliation. The combination of low cost and effectiveness of cyber warfare has led the Iranian Revolutionary Guard to actively and effectively recruit radical Islamist hackers for nefarious purposes. We can't stand idly by while we see nations like Iran threaten the future of this country. So I support this bill, and I commend the folks who have worked on it, and I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to my distinguished colleague from the state of New Jersey, Mr. Rush Holt, who was formerly on the Intelligence Committee.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Chair, I thank the gentleman. The proponents of this legislation, who are all friends and well-intentioned, have repeatedly said there is a real threat, a threat to our critical infrastructure, affecting our waterworks and our electric grid. But this bill is so poorly constructed, it is not designed to protect against those threats. There are any number of flaws with it. But the American Civil Liberties Union points out that there would be an exception to all privacy laws, and it would allow companies to share private and personal data that they hold on their American customers, actually among themselves and with the government. It would not limit companies to sharing only technical or non-personal data. They'd be free from any liability of misuse. They would only have to plead good intentions. The bill fails to narrowly define the privacy laws it would contravene, fails to put the cybersecurity efforts in a civilian agency. It fails to require companies to remove personal identifiable information about individuals. It fails to sufficiently limit the government's use of information. It fails to create a robust oversight and accountability structure. The bill in its current form, there's no requirement that personal information must be removed. There's no consumer or stakeholder group involved in the oversight. There's no way for any member of the public to know if their data has been shared in error, and on and on. Ultimately, passing this bill, and I should point out that it is not just the American Civil Liberties Union that opposes this. Even the American Library Association and the President himself says if this passes, he will veto it. So, passing this bill in response to the cyber threat would be like going into Iraq because al-Qaeda terrorists were a real threat. Yes, there's a real threat. This is not the answer.
Gentleman yields back.
I yield back.
Who seeks time? The chairman from Michigan.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Ohio.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank the gentleman from Michigan for yielding me time. I'd also like to thank him for his leadership on this effort, as well as the ranking member, the gentleman from Maryland. I rise today in support of the cybersecurity legislation under consideration. As a member of the Cybersecurity Task Force, I'm pleased that many of our recommendations are included in this bill. And cybersecurity is a very important issue. Every day there are people trying to use cyber attacks to steal our money, steal our jobs, and attack our national security. You know, our financial sector, I'm a member of the Financial Services Committee, our financial sector spends billions of dollars every year trying to protect against cyber attacks. They protect consumers by increasing controls, making sure they have encryption, authenticating customers, and protecting customer data. That's all protecting our wallets. But we also need to protect our jobs. You know, unfortunately, there are folks who would like to use cyber attacks to steal our intellectual property, give it to those who compete against America, which will steal our jobs. Not allowing information sharing like this bill does would be like saying to the Marines and the Army, you can't share information about how the enemy is going to attack you. As a member of the National Guard for the last 26 years, I know that cyber is also a real threat to our national security. And this bill will update our information sharing to allow private companies to share information with the government to share information, and include some important liabilities on liability protection as well. It's a carefully crafted bill. I think the gentleman from Michigan and the gentleman from Maryland have been very open to working with folks to try to improve this bill. I'm looking forward to supporting some of the bipartisan amendments that I think will improve this bill. But, Madam Speaker, we must protect ourselves against cyber attacks, against those who would steal our money, steal our jobs, and attack our country. This bill is not a panacea, but it's a great start. I'm happy to support it, and I hope all my colleagues will vote yes. Thank you for your time, and I yield back to the
gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to my distinguished colleague from the state of California, Mr. Adam Schiff, who is also the ranking member on the Technical Tactical Committee on the Intelligence Committee.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Chair, I rise in reluctant opposition to the bill, but at the outset I want to acknowledge the extraordinary work done by our Chairman Mike Rogers and our ranking member Dutch Ruppersberger. These two gentlemen have changed the nature and culture of our committee, made it far more productive, and they've done great work getting us to this point, and I want to acknowledge that at the outset. There is still work to be done, and I want to talk briefly about that in two areas principally, but even before I do that, I want to acknowledge why we're here. We do ourselves, I think, a disservice when we talk about a cyber threat. That sounds like something that may come in the future, something to be concerned about that might take place down the line. We are under cyber attack right now. This is not speculative. This is not intangible. This is happening right now. So this needs to be dealt with, and we do need a sense of urgency. But there is distance yet to go, and in two areas in particular. One, when we gather cyber information and we share it between companies or between the government and companies, as we must do, we want to make sure that we minimize any unnecessary invasion of privacy of the American people. And we can do both, and we have to do both. We need to protect ourselves from cyber attack, and we need to protect and preserve the privacy rights of the American people. I think the bill needs a requirement that personally identifiable information be minimized to the maximum extent practicable. All we're asking for is what can reasonably be done. We're not asking for the private sector or the government to do the impossible, but we should require of our government that they minimize personal information that is shared to protect us from cyber crime. That's the first thing. The second item that really needs to be incorporated in this bill that my colleague, Mr. Thompson, will talk about as well is the need to protect critical infrastructure. That is a big missing piece in the bill, and I understand from my colleagues that that's not within the Intelligence Committee jurisdiction. That's correct. But as we saw from the Rules Committee, they're more than capable of incorporating things from more than one committee's jurisdiction in the rule, as we see in a rule that incorporates student loan interest in a bill on that subject with a bill on cybersecurity. So there was nothing preventing the Rules Committee from bringing into the discussion today and allowing amendments on critical infrastructure. The absence of those two big pieces make it impossible for me to support the bill today, but I look forward to working with both parties.
Expired.
Could I have 30 more seconds?
30 more seconds.
Gentleman's recognized for 3 more seconds.
I thank the gentleman. I just want to conclude by saying I look forward to our continued work on this bill, and I appreciate the great cooperation between the chair and ranking member and the respect for all the members of the committee, and I yield back.
Gentleman is back. The gentleman from Michigan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Nevada.
Gentleman from Nevada is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I come to the floor today to voice my strong support for the Cyber Intelligence Sharing and Protection Act. We know that every day American companies and computer systems are targeted by foreign nation-state actors who prey on sensitive business and personal information to gain an unfair advantage in the global marketplace. The theft of research and development results, negotiating positions, or pricing information costs us jobs here at home and puts personal information at risk. The same vulnerabilities that can result in the theft of sensitive business information could be used to attack critical infrastructure we rely on, such as power plants, air traffic control systems, and electrical grids. An attack on these systems would be devastating, and protecting them and the constituents they serve must be considered an urgent national security concern. The government currently uses classified cyber threat intelligence to protect its own systems, computer networks, and critical infrastructure. The business community has voiced its desire to be given the tools necessary to protect themselves from cyber threats. This bill will allow the government to provide classified cyber threat information to private sector companies so that they can protect sensitive information and their customers' privacy against malicious cyber attacks. The bill places no mandates or burdens on private sector companies and does not expand the size or scope of the federal government. All information sharing is totally voluntary under this legislation, and there are strong privacy protections in place for the information that is shared. After receiving input from the private sector and civil liberty groups, and by building upon the success of an existing intelligence sharing pilot program with defense contractors, we have produced a bill that upholds constitutional rights to privacy while providing the private sector with the necessary means to defend itself against cyber attackers. I want to commend Chairman Rogers and Ranking Member Ruppersberger for their outstanding leadership in crafting this legislation that was written in a transparent and bipartisan fashion. I urge my colleagues to support this bill that protects our homeland, protects our economy, and protects our privacy, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to my distinguished colleague from the state of Mississippi, Mr. Benny Thompson, who is also Ranking Member of the Homeland Security Committee.
The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. Madam Chairman, I rise in opposition to H.R. 3523. I also appreciate my colleague on the Intelligence Committee for fostering a great sharing of cyber threat information. This bill is a start, but my opposition is because it does not do what we know that we need to have done. Having been involved in homeland security issues for nearly a decade, I know how important it is to protect our nation's network from cyber attacks. But in an effort to foster information sharing, this bill would erode the privacy protections of every single American using the Internet. It would create a wild west of information sharing where any certified business can share with any government agency who can then use the information for any national security purpose and grant the business immunity from virtually any liability. None of the amendments offered by the chairman and ranking member would change any of those basic facts. I and several of my colleagues offered amendments that would have addressed those concerns by ensuring that civilian agencies would take the lead in information sharing, restricting how the government could use the information, and making sure consumers' sensitive information is adequately protected. Unfortunately, the House will not have an opportunity to consider them today. If my colleagues want to accomplish something on cybersecurity, then vote yes on any of the all suspension bills before us today. But do not vote for H.R. 3523. It violates the do no harm rule and would set back the privacy rights of all the citizens who have enjoyed the establishment of the Internet. This fatally flawed bill is opposed by not only every major privacy or civil liberties group, from the ACLU to the Constitution Project to the Center for Democracy and Technology, but also the Obama administration. For these reasons, Madam Chair, I strongly urge a no on H.R. 3523.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Madam Chair, I would yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Kansas.
The
How about
gentleman
Nebraska?
from Nebraska is
Or
recognized
Kansas
for 2 minutes.
and Nebraska as well.
That's right. I thank the gentleman from Illinois. Madam Chairman, I rise in support of this bill. It's a sensible bill that builds a necessary pillar in the cybersecurity strategy of our nation. I've immersed myself in cybersecurity over the last couple of years. I've been on 2 task forces. I'm on the Committee of Jurisdiction, the Energy and Commerce Act. I've met with industry leaders in all of the critical infrastructure areas. And as I've gathered information and input, there's 2 principles at stake here. The common thread from all of them have said, we have to be flexible and we have to be able to communicate. And those are the 2 principles on which this bill is based. Number 1, flexibility. What it means is you can't lock this into a government agency, because when government agencies start taking control of setting standards or working with an industry group to set standards on cybersecurity, the hackers take 5 seconds to get around that, and it'll take years then for the industry to move around that. You are setting them up as just ducks waiting to be shot if we do that. So we can't. We got to give them the flexibility. So the least government interference is what gives them the flexibility. The next part is communication. When I learned from the critical infrastructure industries is that what they want to know is there a threat out there and what's the specifics of the threat? They know they're under attack every day, but maybe our defense agencies have specific information they can share, but they can't because it's top secret. So this bill allows there to be communication of specific threats, to perhaps communicate from government to private sector some better practices that they can enact. That's what this breaks down, is that barrier, not some of these civil liberty conspiracy theories. This is simple communication between government and private sector to private sector. This isn't reporting on whether you're downloading an illegal movie or whatever. This is about securing our infrastructure, and I yield back.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to my distinguished colleague and friend from the state of Rhode Island, Mr. Langevin, who is also a member of our Intelligence Committee and has worked very hard with the chairman and myself on the issue of cybersecurity. I consider him one of our experts on the Hill in the area of cybersecurity.
The gentleman from Rhode Island is recognized for 2 minutes.
Has unanimous consent to revise and extend.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank the gentleman for yielding. And I rise in strong support of H.R. 3523, and I want to thank Chairman Rogers and Ranking Member Ruppersberger for a bipartisan and inclusive process on an extremely difficult and technical issue. While I don't believe that this legislation is perfect and much work remains to be done, CISPA represents an important good faith effort to come together as a necessary first step towards better cybersecurity for our nation. Now, I have long worked on this issue for many years to raise awareness and to secure our nation against the threats that we face in cyberspace, and quite frankly, we are running out of time. I believe it's important that we act now to begin our legislative response to this critical issue. We all know how dependent we are on the Internet and how we use it so much in our daily lives, but the Internet was never built with security in mind, and what's happening is our adversaries are using the vulnerabilities and the against us. So I've also said that we need, of course, to have, and I've been very clear, that we need to have robust privacy protections that must be included to safeguard personal and information and also defend civil liberties in any cybersecurity response that we do enact. And I'm pleased to say that this legislation has been strengthened in that regard, and I believe, of course, that more can be done as we continue this important debate. That being said, the efficient sharing of cyber threat information envisioned by this legislation is vital to combating advanced cyber threats and stemming the massive ongoing theft of identities, intellectual property, and sensitive security information. This legislation, clear and simply, will allow the government to provide classified information, threat signatures to the private sector, and also allow the private sector to share with us the cybersecurity attacks that they are experiencing, sharing that with the government so we have better situational awareness. If you look at this, it basically gives us radar, if you will, in cyberspace, sharing information back and forth on cyber threats that are facing the country. This bill is a good step, but it's only a first step. Voluntary information sharing is helpful and it's needed, but it does not on its own constitute strong cybersecurity. I've long maintained that we must also move forward on legislation that establishes minimum standards. Another 15 seconds, Mr. Chairman.
30 seconds.
Gentleman is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman for the additional time. I have long maintained that we must also move forward on legislation that establishes minimum standards for the cyber systems that govern our critical infrastructure, particularly the electric grid and our water systems. With that, I again want to thank Chairman Rogers and Mr. Ruppersberger for their outstanding efforts, and I ask my colleagues to support this important cybersecurity information sharing legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Chair, I would recognize for 2 minutes the gentlelady from California.
Gentlelady from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Chair, I rise today in strong support of this bill. This critically needed legislation will help to safeguard America in the future from cyber attacks by unscrupulous and rogue nations, terrorists, and cyber criminals. We need to act before a disaster takes place, not after it, and this is our chance. As Chairman of the House Subcommittee on Commerce, Manufacturing, and Trade, I have spent the past 16 months holding hearings and thoroughly examining the issue of online privacy. So as a co-sponsor of this legislation, I have very carefully reviewed its privacy provisions, and I'm satisfied that it will not negatively impact American consumers. Frankly, the privacy concerns are exaggerated. There is no boogeyman hiding in the closet, and Big Brother is not tapping into your hard drive. This bill provides absolutely no authority to the federal government to monitor private networks. None. Additionally, all information sharing with the government would be completely voluntary. The bill also encourages the private sector to anonymize the information it shares with the government or other entities, including, and this is very important to remember, the removal of personally identifiable information prior to sharing it. And finally, the bill also requires the intelligence community inspector general to review information sharing between the private sector and the government and to provide an annual report to the Congress on its findings. These are very strong privacy protection features, and I applaud Chairman Rogers and Ranking Member Ruppersberger for working so hard to protect the American consumer and to make this a truly bipartisan effort. Unfortunately, some people and some groups will say anything to try and scuttle this bill, sounding false alarms and raising imaginary red flags, despite the very real and dangerous threat posed by terrorists and our enemies if we do nothing. Madam Chair, I strongly urge the adoption of H.R. 3523, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, gentleman. Gentleman from Maryland.
Ms. Johnson, we're ready. I yield 2 minutes to my distinguished colleague from the state of Georgia, Mr. Johnson.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Ranking Member Ruppersberger and Madam Speaker. I rise in opposition to this very disturbing bill. One thing that is important to keeping our country number one has been the personal freedoms that we have all enjoyed since this country's beginning. Those freedoms lie in the Bill of Rights, and the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution within that Bill of Rights provides for a right of privacy. Now, this right of privacy can be impacted by technology and various advances in science that make eavesdropping and surveillance and investigation easier and also more secretive by law enforcement and by personal individuals and by corporations, by any component that may look to misuse information for their personal benefit. And so I rise in opposition to this disturbing bill. CISPA would grant the private sector blanket permission to harvest Americans' data for extremely broad cybersecurity purposes, notwithstanding any other provision of law. It would grant the private sector blanket permission to then share that data with the federal government, notwithstanding any other privacy laws or agreements with users. Then, if I may have 30 more seconds.
30 more seconds.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Then, as if that wasn't disturbing enough, this bill would grant the government broad authority to share that information between intelligence and law enforcement agencies and use it for virtually any purpose defined as important to cybersecurity or national security. I know it's 2012, but it sure feels like 1984 in this House today. If you value liberty, privacy, and the Constitution, then you will vote no on CISPA, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Michigan.
Madam Chair, I'd yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I rise in strong support of this bill. The bill before us today is targeted toward a very specific and growing threat to our nation. Every day, American businesses are being targeted by China, Russia, and other foreign actors for cyber exploitation and theft. These acts of industrial espionage are causing enormous losses of valuable American intellectual property that ultimately cost the United States jobs. We cannot afford to allow high-paying jobs to be stolen in this manner, nor can we simply sit by and allow the cyber warfare being conducted against us to continue without consequences. Mr. Speaker, jobs are at stake, as is the technological capital of the United States. But if the reality of this economic cyber warfare isn't convincing enough, you should understand that there are other good reasons for us to support this bill. The state-of-the-art technology stolen from Americans can easily be turned against us and represents a serious threat to America's critical infrastructure. None in this body would likely disagree that we have to prevent our enemies from protecting American military technology. That's why we have long had export controls and other mechanisms to prevent such a thing from occurring. Madam Speaker, how is the theft of intellectual property any less a threat today? Whether we like it or not, cyber warfare is a reality. Our government and its security agencies understand this and are using both classified and unclassified information to fight the threat. But without passage of this bill, they are being forced to do so without the meaningful participation of industries, private industries, that are being subjected to attacks that in some cases our government even knows about but cannot share that with those private companies. So we shouldn't expect America's private sector innovators to protect themselves if we won't tell them where the attacks are coming from. And if we don't share this information or allow them to share information with us,
Gentleman's time has expired.
How do we expect to secure this sensitive information? 30 more seconds, Mr. Chairman.